The Wyoming Territory sun burned like a branding iron as the train vanished into the shimmering heat of June 1887. Clara Hartfield stood motionless on the splintered platform of Rawlins Station, her fingers crushing the lace trim of her gloves. The last echo of the locomotive's whistle carried away the man who'd sworn to love her along with her dowry and her dignity. Not even a backward glance. 3 hours ago, he'd vanished between the freight office and the water pump, like a coward into the prairie wind. Now the rails stretched empty and Clara's ribs ached with the kind of quiet that comes before the storm. A shadow shifted near the stock pens. Jesse Colton had seen it all, the slick city bastard, abandoning his woman the way her posture stayed ramrod straight, even as her knuckles turned white around that fancy carpetbag. He'd ridden into town to sell Mustangs, not play guardian angel. But something about the way her bonnet ribbons trembled in the dust-choked air made him spit out his tobacco and step forward. "Ma'am," he drawled, tipping his hat. "That no-account fella forget his manners." Or his spine. Clara's laugh was sharper than a Bowie knife. His spine, his conscience, and apparently his ability to recognize a train schedule. The unexpected bite in her voice made Jesse's eyebrows climb. She wasn't some wilting eastern flower, she was a wildfire in petticoats. "You got folks here?" he asked. "Just the scorpions and my regrets." Jesse scratched his stubble. Hell, he'd been kicked by mules with better prospects than this. "I got a spread 2 valleys west. Roof's got holes, but the whiskey's clean." When she hesitated, he added, "There's a telegraph office in Laramie. You can wire your people tomorrow." What he didn't say was that he'd noticed the way her gaze kept darting to the wanted posters near the station master's window, or how one of them bore a striking resemblance to her runaway beau. Clara smoothed her skirts, and for the first time, Jessie saw the glint of a derringer tucked in her boot. Well now, this day just got interesting. As the wagon lurched onto the trail, a coyote yipped in the distance. Clara tilted her face into the wind, her voice softer now. "You always rescue strays, Mr. Colton. Only the ones that bite back," he grinned. Somewhere ahead, thunder rumbled over the Bighorns, the kind of storm that either cleanses a soul or drowns it. Either way, Jessie reckoned they'd find out by sunrise. The wagon wheels creaked as Clara and Jessie rolled through the golden light of late afternoon, the silence between them filled only by the whisper of prairie grass against the axles. She studied the calluses on her palms, city hands already roughening after just days at the ranch. When the cabin came into view, its cedar logs glowing amber in the sunset, Jesse cleared his throat. "Neighbor left supper on the stove. Hope you like venison stew." Clara stiffened at the rifle propped by the door. "You expecting trouble?" "Always." He grinned, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Inside the cabin smelled of wood smoke and dried sage. A cast-iron pot simmered on the stove next to a chipped enamel plate holding a single rusted bullet. Clara's fingers hovered over it. "Souvenir from my last disagreement," Jesse said casually, hanging his hat on a nail. "Fella thought stealing my cattle was a retirement plan." That night, as wind howled through the canyon, Clara jolted awake to the sound of splintering wood. A shadow loomed in the doorway, not Jesse, but a hulking stranger reeking of whiskey. "Well now," the man slurred, "heard the preacher's boy was harboring a runaway bride." Clara's hand slid under the pillow where she'd hidden the derringer. Before she could move, a shotgun blast echoed from the porch. The drunkard stumbled back as Jesse stepped into the moonlight, barrel smoking. "You got 3 seconds to remember how to ride Baxter." The intruder fled, but not before spitting. "She ain't worth dying for Colton." At dawn, Clara found Jesse repairing the kicked-in door, his shirt sleeve torn where a knife had grazed his arm. "You're bleeding," she said, tearing a strip from her petticoat. "Worse things happen at church socials." He winced as she bandaged the cut, then caught her wrist. "That bullet on the stove belonged to the man who swore to kill me for turning in his gang. Point is, you're safe here." Clara's laugh was brittle. "From outlaws, maybe. Not from my own bad judgment." She gestured to the wanted poster nailed to the wall, the face of her vanished fiancé glaring beneath the word swindler. Jesse tore it down and fed it to the stove. "Funny thing about the West," he said, watching the paper blacken. "Out here, even the broken pieces can make a damn fine mosaic." By week's end, Clara could saddle a horse and spot a rattlesnake before it buzzed, but it was the ledger book she found in Jesse's trunk that changed everything, pages filled with dates and sums sent to an orphanage in Denver. When she confronted him, he just shrugged. My sister runs the place. Figured if I couldn't save my own family, I'd help somebody else's. The next morning, Clara mounted up without being asked, her hair braided tight as a lasso. "Show me those fence lines you mentioned," she said. As they rode into the crimson dawn, a coyote trotted across their path, not running, just moving on like all creatures who'd learned the art of starting over. The ridge where they stopped overlooked a valley so vast it made Clara's breath catch. Below them, a herd of wild mustangs thundered across the open plain, their manes whipping like banners in the wind. Jesse leaned forward in his saddle, his voice rough with admiration. "That led mare, she's outrun every mustanger in Wyoming territory. They call her La Reina, the queen." Clara's fingers tightened on the reins. "She reminds me of someone." Jesse's chuckle was warm as sunlight on whiskey. "Yeah, well, she bites too." They rode back with their knees brushing the silence between them easy now. That night, Clara didn't retreat to the cabin after supper. Instead, she pulled Jesse's harmonica from his saddlebag and handed it to him by the fire. "Play something that isn't sad," she demanded. The notes that spilled out were lively, a frontier tune about a gambler who lost his shirt but won a gold mine. Clara surprised them both by singing along, her voice clear and strong on the chorus. Jesse's eyes locked onto hers mid-verse, and suddenly the song wasn't about luck anymore. Come morning, they found more than broken fence rails at the north gate. A crude symbol was carved into the post, a circle with a slash through it. Jesse's jaw hardened. "Baxter's mark means he's coming back." Clara ran her thumb over the fresh carving sap, still sticky on her skin. "Let him." She grabbed the hammer and drove a nail so hard it split the wood. By afternoon, they'd rebuilt the gate stronger than before, but as they mounted up to leave, a gunshot cracked across the canyon. Jesse's hat flew off as he shoved Clara behind the horses. A voice echoed from the rocks. "Should have taken my warning, Colton." Clara didn't hesitate. She yanked Jesse's Winchester from its scabbard and fired toward the sound, not to kill, but close enough to make the coward's next shot go wide. The answering silence was sweeter than any victory cheer. Jesse stared at her, his chest heaving. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My father believed in equal education," she said, handing back the rifle. "Even for disappointing daughters." That night, as cicadas sang in the cottonwoods, Jesse traced the calluses on Clara's palms by firelight. "You ever think about staying?" he asked quietly. Clara turned her hand to lace their fingers together. "I already have." Somewhere in the darkness, Lorena whinnied to her herd, a wild thing choosing its place to belong. The branding fire spat embers into the twilight as Clara wrestled a bawling calf onto its side. Jesse's neighbor, old Tom Hawkins, grinned through his tobacco-stained beard. "Ain't seen a city gal take to branding like a Comanche since, well, ever." Clara shot him a look that could curdle milk as she pressed the red-hot iron to the hide. The calf kicked free with a screech, sending Tom scrambling backward into the dirt. Jesse tossed his lasso aside, shoulders shaking with laughter. "Told you she bites." By sundown, Clara's dress was splattered with mud and cow dung, her hair a wild tangle beneath Jesse's battered Stetson. As they walked back to the cabin, she flexed her blistered hands with grim satisfaction. "That Hawkins fellow talks too much for a man who can't dodge a three-legged calf." Thunder growled in the distance as Jesse pulled her into the tack shed. Rain drummed, sudden and fierce, on the roof while he rummaged for the liniment. "Hold still," he ordered, working the salve into her palms. His touch was rougher than necessary punishment for her stubbornness. Clara yanked her hand back. "I'm not some China doll you need to—" A deafening crack split the air as lightning struck the cottonwood outside. The shed door blew open, revealing a sight that turned Clara's blood to ice. 3 riders, silhouetted against the storm, their slickers glistening like reptile skin. The lead man tipped his hat, the same brute who kicked in their door weeks before. "Evening, lovebirds. Heard you been asking after me." Jesse's hand went to his Colt, but Clara was faster. She snatched the branding iron from its hook and swung it in a blazing arc, sending the intruder's horses rearing in panic. One outlaw went down hard, his boot caught in the stirrup as his mount bolted. The other 2 cursed, fighting their spooked animals as Jesse's shotgun found its way into his hands. Next time, Clara hissed, the iron still glowing cherry red in her grip. Knock. The storm passed before midnight, leaving the world washed clean. Jesse found Clara on the porch, her bare feet dangling over the edge as she studied the wanted poster in her lap, the one with her ex-fiancé's smirking face. Without a word, Jesse struck a match and held it to the paper. They watched the flames consume the likeness together, its edges curling into blackened lace. You know, Clara mused as the last ember died. I've been thinking about expanding the herd. Maybe some of those wild Mustangs we saw. Jesse stretched out beside her, his voice thick with the promise of tomorrow. Long as you save Lorena for me. Somewhere beyond the pasture, a lone coyote yipped at the rising moon. Not a warning, but a celebration. The kind only heard in places where broken things get second chances. The morning sun painted Main Street gold as Clara Hartfield strode into the land office, Jesse's shadow trailing behind her like a loyal wolf. The clerk's spectacles slid down his nose as he eyed her ink-stained fingers, the same hands that had mended fences and drawn blood when necessary. "You sure about this, little lady?" he drawled, pushing the deed across the counter. "That parcel's got rattlers and hardpan." Clara didn't blink. "So do I." When the quill scratched her name across the document, the sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Outside, a group of ranch hands loitering by the saloon fell silent as she emerged, the deed clutched in her fist like a winning poker hand. One muttered, "That's Colton's woman, just loud enough to carry." Jesse's knuckles whitened on his rifle stock, but Clara just smiled, the kind that showed teeth. She sauntered over to the men, her spurs chiming with each step. "Actually," she said, unfolding the paper with a flourish, "I'm Hartfield, owner of the Rocking H spread." The lie came smooth as aged whiskey, the brand she just invented, gliding off her tongue like it had always existed. Back at the mercantile, she traded her lace-trimmed handkerchief, the last relic of her old life, for 24 apple saplings. The shopkeeper's wife gaped as Clara hefted the bundle like firewood. "What in creation you gonna do with those?" "Build an orchard," Clara said, nodding toward Jesse, loading grain sacks across the street. "In a future that doesn't fit in your ledger books." That evening, they camped on her new land beneath a sky so vast it swallowed echoes. Clara traced the property lines with her boot heel, while Jesse staked the corners with cedar posts. When he reached the last marker, she pulled him down into the sweet grass, the deed crumpling between them. "Tell me the truth," she breathed against his stubble. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" Jesse's laugh rumbled through them both as he pinned the paper under a rock. "Nah, darling. I just recognized another wild thing that needed room to run." Somewhere beyond the firelight, a lone coyote sang to the rising moon. Not a lament, but a love song for the untamed. The kestrel's shadow flickered across Clara's face as she sipped her whiskey, real Kentucky bourbon, not the rot gut Jesse used to drink. The porch boards creaked under his weight when he leaned forward, his voice rough as saddle leather. "You still think about those city streets?" Clara swirled the amber liquid, watching it catch the dying light. "Sometimes. Mostly I wonder about the girl who thought she wanted them." She tipped the glass toward the newly cleared field, where their mixed herd, his cattle and her Mustangs, grazed together. "Turns out what I needed was room to breathe and something wild to tame." Jesse's thumb traced the scar on her wrist, a souvenir from the broken gate incident. "Speaking of wild," he reached into his vest pocket and tossed a crumpled newspaper onto her lap. The headline screamed, "Swindler captured in Denver gang, left in disarray." Clara's fingers didn't tremble as she folded the paper into quarters. "You been carrying this since town. Figured you'd want to know." His eyes never left her face. "They're sending him to Yuma." The cicadas roared suddenly, filling the silence. When Clara finally spoke, her voice was softer than corn silk. "You know what I planted by the well today, lilacs? Same kind my mother grew back in Illinois." She stood abruptly, the newspaper fluttering to the floorboards. "Come see." In the twilight, the saplings stood straighter than soldiers, their leaves trembling in the warm breeze. Jesse crouched to press dirt firmer around the roots. "They won't bloom till next spring." Clara wiped her hands on her trousers, men's Levi's now hacked off at the knees. "That's all right," she said. "We'll be here to see it." Later, when the fireflies emerged, they found the newspaper again. This time, Clara held it to the cook stove's flame. The inked words curled to ash as Jesse's harmonica played the first notes of Red River Valley, not the sad version, but the one the cowboys sang when driving herds to new grass. Somewhere beyond the pasture, Lorena whinnied to her foal, the sound carrying clear across land that belonged to a woman who'd stopped pretending. The West had a way of keeping promises the East never could. The silver ring caught the morning sun as Clara held it between calloused fingers, the metal still warm from Jesse's pocket. She studied the simple braided design no Eastern jeweler's work, but something forged right there in Wyoming territory. "This looked like a rescue to you," she asked, nodding toward the half-built cabin where her Winchester leaned against a sawhorse, the barrel gleaming. Jesse's laugh sent a jackrabbit skittering into the sagebrush. "More like a surrender." The rail rider returned at noon with Jesse's sister in tow, a wiry woman in a split skirt with the same sharp green eyes as her brother. Sarah Colton dropped her carpet bag and sized up Clara in one glance. "So you're the hellcat who put Baxter in the infirmary." She thrust out a hand rougher than most cowboys. "Pleasure's mine." By sundown, Sarah had claimed the lean-to behind the cabin, declared the rocking-inch branding iron too fancy by half, and taught Clara 3 new ways to cheat at poker. As firelight danced across the new cabin's unfinished walls, Clara realized this was what family felt like. Not the stifling parlors of Illinois, but this easy chaos of shared labor and laughter. When the first snow dusted the Bighorns, they moved the wedding indoors. Sarah stood witness in her one good dress, the same harmonica Jesse had played that first night now tucked in her pocket. The circuit preacher smelled of horse liniment and peppermints as he pronounced them married. Clara's bouquet was nothing but wild sage and a single stubborn lilac bloom forced early by the cook stove's heat. Later, when Sarah had tactfully retreated to the barn, Jesse traced the silver band on Clara's finger. "Still want those city curtains?" Clara kissed him with the taste of sage and home on her lips. "Only if they come with more gun racks." Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains, not a warning, but a welcome. The kind only heard by those brave enough to build their forever from scratch. The wind carried Miriam's laughter across the yard as she helped Clara wrestle a stubborn post into place. "Lord alive, girl." Miriam gasped, wiping her forehead with a sleeve. "You build fences like you're mad at the ground." Clara grinned, shoving a rock into place with her boot. "Wait till you see how I plant roses." By week's end, the 3 of them fell into an easy rhythm. Miriam sketching plans for a proper chicken coop at dawn, Clara and Jesse working the north pasture until the light faded. Evenings found them on the half-finished porch, passing a jug of Jesse's terrible homemade whiskey, while Miriam told stories of boarding houses and railroad towns that made Clara's old life seem dull as dishwater. One such night, Miriam produced a yellowed photograph from her valise. "Ma wanted you to have this," she said, handing it to Jesse. The image showed a younger Miriam standing beside a dark-haired woman with Clara's same defiant chin. Clara's breath caught. "That's your mama," Miriam finished. "Worked the same Denver boarding house back in '68. Recognized you the minute I saw that stubborn tilt to your head." The revelation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Jesse's fingers tightened around Clara's. "You knew," Miriam shrugged. "Figured the West would bring you 2 together sooner or later. It's got a way of setting things right." At dawn, Clara knelt by her transplanted wildflowers, pressing the photograph into the soil beneath the roots. Some bonds she realized grew deeper than blood or borders. The kind that could weather any storm, just like the lilac sapling, already putting out stubborn green shoots despite the coming winter. When Miriam announced her plan to open a telegraph office in town, Clara handed her the deed to the east parcel without a word. The sisters-in-law's grip was firm, their understanding deeper than any legal document. After all, out here, family wasn't just who you came from. It was who stood beside you when the wind howled and the fences needed mending. The tobacco patch flourished by midsummer, its broad leaves rustling in the wind like whispered secrets. Clara ran her fingers along the plants one evening, the silver brooch now permanently fastened to her work apron, catching the last light. Inside the cabin, Jesse's voice mingled with Miriam's laughter as they argued over a chessboard salvaged from driftwood. A new sound cut through the familiar rhythm, the distant whistle of the Rollins train. Clara didn't flinch. She simply tucked a stray lock of gray-streaked hair behind her ear and walked toward the porch where her rifle leaned its barrel polished to a dull shine. The seasons turned as they always did. Miriam's telegraph office became the town's lifeline, her quick fingers translating Morse code into birth announcements and storm warnings. Jesse's beard grew whiter than the Bighorn snows, though his grip remained steady when helping Clara deliver a breech calf during the bitter winter of '93. On their 20th anniversary, Clara pressed a new harmonica into Jesse's hands, this one polished brass with Lorena engraved on the side. "So you don't forget who really runs this ranch," she teased. That night, under a sky pulsing with stars, the old outlaw Baxter stumbled into their yard, drunk and desperate. Clara met him on the porch with her Winchester, the brooch gleaming at her collar. "Evening, ma'am." he slurred, squinting at the silver. Ain't you that city gal Colton took in? Clara smiled the same wolfish grin that had sent him running decades before. Nope, I'm Hartfield. This is my land. When the first lilacs bloomed the following spring, their fragrance carried all the way to the new graves in the meadow simple markers for Miriam, taken by pneumonia, and Jesse gone quietly in his sleep. Clara planted sage between the stones and sat on their bench as the sunset painted the hills crimson. The train whistle blew again in the distance. This time Clara stood and walked toward it, her steps slow but sure. She had a telegram to send to Denver where a young woman with Jesse's green eyes was waiting to hear the story of how the West was won one stubborn heart at a time. The wind stirred the wildflowers at her feet, their roots now deeper than memory. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a Mustang whinnied. Not Lorena she'd passed years ago, but her great-grand foal running free as the land itself. Clara tipped her face to the sky and laughed, the sound carrying across a lifetime of fences built and storms weathered. No epitaph could say it better. The years etched their story into the land the way Clara's roses climbed the porch posts, where Jesse's hands had notched the wood for her, the grove of apple trees that now bore fruit from those first saplings she'd bartered for with lace. Even after the railroad came through and Rollins swelled into a proper town, their ranch remained untouched by progress, a stubborn island of wildness in a changing West. On summer evenings, townsfolk would sometimes ride out just to see the famous Hartfield lilacs in bloom. They'd find Clara on her bench, Jesse's harmonica resting on her lap, watching the Mustangs run. No one ever stayed long. Something in her quiet presence made visitors feel they were intruding on a sacred thing. When the telegram came from Denver announcing her granddaughter's arrival, Clara didn't weep. She simply saddled Lorena's descendant and rode to the station, her back straight as the day she'd been abandoned there. The girl who stepped off the train had Jesse's eyes and Clara's chin, her city boots already dusty from the platform. Well, Clara asked, nodding toward the waiting horse. The girl grinned, swinging up without help. Grandpa always said you were the best shot in Wyoming. Clara clicked her tongue and turned toward home. Behind them, the train whistle faded into the vast silence of the prairie, where the wind still carried the scent of sage and the echoes of a love that had outlived empires. Some stories didn't need telling. They were written in the calluses of clasped hands and the stubborn lilacs that bloomed each spring in the way the land remembered those who had loved it right. The West had given Clara Hartfield many things: a home, a legend, a family. But the greatest gift was the quiet understanding that some loves didn't end. They just became part of the soil, waiting to nourish whatever grew next.